Hello and welcome to the week 8 day 2 video lecture. We're going to discuss a lot today, and it concerns P3, things like audience, secondary sources, outlining, just a bunch of different stuff. But let's start with audience. How is audience important to this research memo? In order to write a memo that focuses on purpose and audience, you need to figure out who your audience is. You should already know this. But you can also perform an online search to find an organization that wants to implement changes to the problem that you have chosen for this research memo. Essentially, you've chosen a topic or a problem, right? And maybe you don't know which organization you could pretend to work for in the scenario because you're writing the memo for them. But if you look up organizations that have associations with your problem, then it will help you write your report because you have to gear it towards that particular company or nonprofit or organization because they are your audience. They're reading your research memo, nobody else. Based on your chosen problem for project 3, find an organization that would serve as a group that wishes to implement your research. This group, this company would take action to address the problem in your research memo. For instance, if the problem you've outlined in your research memo is about water pollution, you would either want to find an audience of environmental nonprofit groups or like city planners. This report would vary based on which one of these audiences that you picked. Environmental nonprofits would be more interested in the environmental effects of the problem. While if you chose something like city planners, they'd be interested in the resources and the costs associated with the problem. In this way, your audience is going to impact how you structure the memo and the wording. And really, ideally, what is the problem for your company? To identify your audience, start a search. You can search on Google or whatever for a specific individual or group, company, nonprofit that can take action on your problem. You should identify this. When I said individual, forget that. I meant a company, group, association, or nonprofit. You have to find them by name and then try answering a few questions about this audience that you brought up. Think about who is that target audience? What are they going to do? The questions that you see on the screen. Ask yourselves these things about your audience because it's going to help you assert certain things on your research memo. Thinking back to project 1 with all those scenarios. For project 3, this is just another scenario. And you can imagine that you're writing this memo to a boss at your workplace. It's going to help put you in the mind frame of writing this document for a professional organization to research this professional problem. Still, real world research doesn't always rely on scholarly sources. And basically, for professional purposes, any type of source can be deemed credible, or I would say useful, if it's not outright lying. Ask yourself when you're assessing information to include on a report or a memo, will this information help the target audience make a decision? If so, it's usable. but you should also consider the possible limitations of how your information was obtained and how it was written. For instance, consider the credibility or the ethos of real-world users on platforms when assessing something like a tweet. Online posts are not always correct or as well versed in the topic as they may imply. Review the real-world example on the screen. Because even if real-world users are wrong in their facts, online observation can still be representative of the sentiment, the pathos, or the feeling concerning the topic. For instance, the math in the tweet is wrong, but the user's sentiment still represents a growing frustration with money and politics in the US. Thus, the tweet can be cited and evaluated for pathos, as long as you make that clear. And you distinguish the tweet as incorrect in terms of math, but there's some pathos there that speaks truth in a different way and not a collective truth, but a truth among some consumers, possible consumers, whatever. So, although real world posts like the one we just saw can illustrate real world user concerns, they might not be factual or credible. The tweet that we just reviewed might be an impacted population and they could be mistaken. They could be outright lying. And simply because you review something as primary research and it's a tweet or an online review, this doesn't mean you definitively know everything there is to know about the problem. This is why it's better to review a range of tweets or a range of Reddit posts or Google reviews. Say you stop at 20 or 30 that you've gathered rather than just gathering one. Likewise, for surveys, it's best to disclose the number of respondents that you get. If you get 5 or more respondents for this project, that's fine, though by all means try to get more than 5. And then in your memo, try to discuss the types of respondents you received in your survey, like were they mostly students, women, men in their 50s? If you're interviewing someone as your primary research, it's best to interview a career professional rather than a friend, as the career professional has a position that instills greater credibility of their answers rather than if you interviewed your friend or someone who doesn't know much about the topic. However, any form of primary research response, whether it's incorrect or not, is representative of possible impacted population sentiment and thus should be considered as part of your larger research puzzle. Know that for whatever the results or the type of primary research you use, it's one part of the problem and not a definitive truth. I say that often, and I'm going to probably say it again, but it's just so you absorb how primary research is really a central part of P3, kind of how creating a figure was a central part of P2. And just like the figures you created, that's just one part of the project. Primary research is just one part of this project. The password for the assignment that asked for it in week 8, day 2 is Adnan Syed. That's part of an amazing documentary on HBO that you can watch. And then if you get really invested in it, you just go down a wiki rabbit hole and find out even more about it. And it's even ongoing today. It's interesting stuff. Going back to the project, you bolster the credibility of your primary sources by balancing it with secondary source information. This is where you can use something like the Procon database. I may or may not have mentioned that before, but it can help you find articles and websites based on your topic The information you find might be general, but you can use it to compare it with stats or local information about your particular locale or impacted population. So option 1 is the top image on the screen. And you can log in from the link in modules 8.2 Understanding Concepts. And that's, again, using the Procon database to find some secondary sources. But if you want to use the good old USF library, that's option 2. And you can find a link for that in on your USF homepage, I imagine. I might have it linked on the course. But you can also find, if you go to the USF library page, you can find databases, Gale, in context, opposing viewpoints. Yeah, I kind of lost the thread of what I was doing there, but let's move on. If you use something like the Procon database to find some secondary sources, type in a few words about your topic and the location, which will help you narrow down your search. On the screen are example search terms to help add background or definition, causes of the problem. Maybe if you were going to research something like real estate in Florida or drinking water in Florida, Procon is great because it's going to help you find articles, videos, or even websites about your topic. And whenever you type in your topic, it shows you a breakdown of the types or the secondary sources that you can review. So it's possible to use Procon as the place to obtain both an academic and a popular source for your P3 research memo. Procon is one option for finding a source to add background, explanation, or causes of the problem, because you need a citation for each one of those sections of your memo. It's okay if the article or your secondary source does not directly relate to your area, as I mentioned before. Maybe it's discussing drinking water conditions in all of Florida, but your location is Tampa for your memo. You can still use the article as a source and maybe just discuss how it's an example of the water quality in the state, which is still impacting Tampa Bay. So you still use the source, but you refer to the relevance in your particular area, and you would still want to cite that source using a hyperlink, footnote, or endnote. I'm sorry if you hear my kids in the background, but it's going to happen. When thinking of how you could use anything from the secondary source, you could start with answering some questions once you scan read the source. Questions like the ones that you see on the screen, and this will help you briefly summarize main points that are important to your research and what will help you build parts of the research memo. If you kind of pull the important parts of the secondary source from what's on the screen, you're going to get the information from that source to incorporate into the relevant sections of the research memo. And that's what you want. Getting research for the memo is great, but how are you going to organize it all, right? That's where an outline can come in handy. Even though outlines, they're boring, they're tedious, I know, just thinking about it. But in the workplace, an outline can be essential. Why? It's because organization starts with knowing your expectations. Know the design, you can ask and learn what's expected of the document. With an outline, you'll know which piece of secondary source information is going to be more pertinent. Again, like fitting together a puzzle piece. And you can also construct pieces of the text, other pieces, by having an outline document on your phone, and you fill it out during downtime. I did that all the time as an undergrad and grad student. Contrary to popular opinion, outlines are pretty damn cool. On the screen, there's a basic template of the research summary memo. You can also review it later in 8.2 Understanding Concepts. These are all the textual expectations of the document. And you can look to the student samples in the modules for more ideas on design, but don't really worry about that for this stage. Using this basic template that you see on the screen, which is essentially the memo headers that you need, you can fill out your own ideas to start drafting this thing. Like the P2 report, this memo should have an intro and a conclusion. Just like the P2 report, you have a topic to overview, but instead of focusing on analyzing figures for your boss, you're writing to your boss about different facets of a problem, such as the background causes and impacted population. The conclusion part is going to be a brief suggestion of a solution, possible solution to the problem. For my face-to-face class, to start thinking of a way to present your problem and solution in a visual way, kind of a visual type format to quickly convey your purpose and audience. In particular, how to include your primary research in a visual way, which will convey timeliness and interest in your real world professional problem. This is going to happen in week 10 or at the start of project 4 to form the P4 groups. For my online classes, don't worry about this at all. I'm going to formulate the groups in a different way. So let's jump on Canvas and see what day 2 has in store for us. It should just be the rough draft. When we click on modules, we go to week 8 and we're in day 2 stuff. We just see the draft there. If you've noticed, I've cleaned up the modules so that they, when you look at it, there's not so much stuff, and I kind of condensed where the stuff is. So instead of having the module kind of be so thick, where the readings and extra credit would have been, there you can access them here as links instead and student samples. And sometimes I'll add other things here that you should access for that week, like the CFF for next week. But that was a way I thought to condense the modules in response to midterm survey results in which students were like, I like the organization of the course, but sometimes you look at the module and there's a lot going on there, and I totally get that. So I hope by condensing that, you'd feel less overwhelmed, but knowing that that stuff is still there, the readings and the extra credit. So we open the rough draft because that's all you have to do this week. And there is an outline there as promised, which you should copy and paste onto a document that you're going to work from. I already did that here. At the bottom or the top of the draft, you want to include the password, which is Adnan Syed. And as you're working through this, remember certain parts to include in your memo, in particular that you need secondary sources, you need a primary source, and maybe that will be using Voyant tools because you're analyzing 20 tweets and you copy and paste them, and you're looking at frequency of terms and kind of what they could mean, or terms that are related to each other and what that could kind of mean about, for instance, if the word service was here and good was here, is that a good connection? What assumption can you draw from the correlations of the words mentioned in reviews or tweets in reference to your problem? And then your primary research needs to be featured in a visual way. And so I screen grabbed this right here. I've seen students screen grab this table as well if you're using Voyant tools, and you integrate it in whichever part of, let me do this, whichever part of the memo you think it fits in. If it's more referring to background of the problem, maybe it goes there. If it's helping you to explain the problem overall, maybe the problem is bad customer service and the reviews are really bad, then that's helping explain the problem. If it's more of a cause of the problem and it helps you support that, then it's there. Or if you want to show how that impacted population is feeling, or again, how they're being impacted, maybe your primary research image and analysis, why does it matter, will go there. So wherever you place the image, as long as it's not intro or conclusion, because that doesn't make sense, in the main body sections, let's highlight those. In your main body sections, put your primary research and a few sentences of analysis, kind of like when you had to analyze a figure in Project 2. Why does it matter? Add that to one of these sections. You choose where it goes. And then again, cap it off with an intro and a conclusion. And don't worry about any of the formatting stuff, MLA or APA. It needs to look a little prettier than that. And that's maybe when you copy it and you look at templates for memos, because this is a memo, and you put it here. And then you can use bullet points, but you should still break it up using subheaders so I can quickly glance and make sure you have all the sections that you need. Somehow make it look like a memo and submit it to USF Rights with review of, excuse me, with a review of how I will grade the assignment. So it's open disclosure of how I'm assigning the different points. That's important for you to know and for you to help you meet the outcomes of the assignment before you hit submit. You have questions, you reach out via email or WhatsApp. And until next time for week 9.